Hi guys, welcome to lesson 6 on Odd One Out in the series Verbal Ability and Reading Comprehension for Cat. You can follow me on this link and please do rate and review the lesson series. Thank you so much. Let's get started with the lesson number 6. So, one question. Okay, that is too much text. Let's start reading it. I see a lot of existentialism. Okay, so one thing is that I am not intimidated by the topic itself. A lot of people think that okay, existentialism, a lot of, let's say, I don't know, psychology, what do you call it, but that is what I have been trying to convey through the entire lecture series, that the topic is more or less irrelevant, whether it is politics, whether it is sports, whether it is current affairs, whatever it is, history, geography, whatever topic comes, the sequence can be solved using basic common sense, and that is what I'll hopefully try to deploy here. Existentialism is nothing else but an attempt to draw a full conclusion from a consistently atheistic position. Okay. In existentialism, the individual's starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation. Okay. And confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world amidst despair, angst, instability, alienation, and boredom. Okay, I am already bored. Existentialism is the work of philosophers like this guy who, despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that philosophical thinking begins. Oh my god. What is this? Okay, I need to focus harder. Despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that philosophical thinking begins with the human subject, not merely the thinking subject, but the acting, feeling, living human individual who is solely responsible for giving meaning to life and living it passionately, sincerely, or authentically. Oh God. Many existentialists have also regarded traditional systematic or academic philosophies in both style and content as too abstract and remote from concrete human experiences. Experience. Okay, I have absolutely no clue how to proceed on this one. So let's read it over and over again. Maybe we'll stumble upon something. So this is a classic example of how I get clueless. This is how I have been clueless in my MBA exams also, but somehow probably I worked my way around. Let's hope it works out this time also. In existentialism, the individual's starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of apparently meaningless or absurd world. You are introducing what existentialism is here, is it? No, you're giving some detail about existentialism, that okay, in existentialism this is what happens. So if you're taking something about existentialism forward, you should have probably talked about it first. Existentialism nothing else but an attempt. So this is a very harsh criticism of existentialism. So this is not going to be the starting point. Even 2 is not going to be the starting point. Yeah, clearly 3 is the starting sentence, because this is the only one which introduces what existentialism is, where it stems from. So it tells that okay, it is the work of philosophers like this guy who, despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that okay, philosophical thinking begins with the human subject, not just the guy who thinks, but the guy who acts and lives his life passionately. Okay, now it has started to make some sense that okay, sentence 3 is the only one that can actually start the whole sequence. Many existentialists have also regarded traditional systematic or academic philosophies in both style and content as too absurd. Okay. Here in sentence 1, the author is directly criticizing existentialism himself. In 4, is he criticizing it himself, or is he just quoting what existentialists regard traditional systematic or academic philosophies? Okay, got it. Here in sentence 4, traditional philosophies, traditional systematic or academic philosophies are being criticized. In sentence 1, you're criticizing existentialism itself. Can 3, 2, 4 not be a sequence? Because I don't see any reason to criticize existentialism here already. Would you do that? Or would you go ahead with 3, 2, 1? We'll have to read it. And that is the problem with very verbose sentences, because I have a habit of reading the sentences over and over again and seeing which is the appropriate sequence in as per the casual conversation that we engage in. So this is going to consume time. Existentialism is the work of philosophers like this guy who, despite profound doctrinal differences, did this, that okay, it's not just the human being thinking guy, but also the guy who lives. Fine. The individual starting point is characterized by what is called the attitude or a sense of disorientation and confusion. Okay. Clearly, sentence 1 is the excluded sentence, isn't it? You're talking about drawing conclusions from an atheistic position. There's no reason for you to talk about such harsh criticism already. You've just introduced the topic. You've talked about what existentialists do, what these philosophers do. You're not gonna criticize the topic as a whole already. You just introduced it, haven't you? Many existentialists have also regarded other philosophies as too abstract and remote from concrete human experience. All right, beautifully connected. That okay. You were talking about how it is not just the thinking guy, but also the guy who acts. So you can relate it to human experience here. So it could be, the sequence could be 342 or 324. But one, I'm pretty sure that one is the sentence that is gonna be excluded. That okay, you talked about how it is the work of philosophers like this guy who, in spite of differences, begin with the human subject, not just the person who thinks but also acts and lives. And then you move on to human experience. And then you say that okay, the starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world, amidst despair, angst, absurdity, alienation, and boredom. One is the excluded sentence. I'm not sure whether it would be 342 or 324, but clearly one is the excluded sentence. Yeah, correct. Not an easy one at all. Let's move on. This theory says that, which theory says that between you and anything you want to accomplish, there is a constraint or a limiting factor that determines how fast you get to where you want to go. Okay. 80% of your constraints will be within yourself, and 20% of the constraints will be outside yourself, constrained in other people and situations. Okay. The speed at which you will pass through this bottleneck will largely determine. Okay, I see Eliyahu Goldratt. He's the guy who, okay, theory of constraints. Okay, I've studied this in the course production and operations management. So constraint management is a topic I've studied. Okay, so I know his theory that you need to focus on the bottleneck. Okay, the speed at which you will pass through the bottleneck will largely determine the speed of your entire journey, of course. Would you want to start off with sentence 4? Eliyahu Goldratt described an important breakthrough in thinking in his book, The Goal, described as the theory of constraints. Okay, so straight away you can go to 1, can't you? This theory says that between you and anything you want to accomplish, there is a constraint or a limiting factor, which is the bottleneck, that determines how fast you get to where you want to go. Then can you go to 3? The speed at which you will pass through this bottleneck. Which bottleneck? Limiting factor will largely determine the speed of your journey. 80% of your constraint will be within your... Why do you want to talk about where the constraints are? Let's check 5. If you're driving down a freeway and traffic construction is narrowing all cars into a single lane, this bottleneck or choke point becomes the constraint. Okay, got it. 5 will come first, and then this is the bottleneck which you will refer to in sentence 3. 4, 1, 5, 3 is the sequence. 2 is the odd one out. It became easier because of 2 reasons. One, that I already have the sequence with me. Second, that I was able to identify that, okay, the constraints that you're talking about, you're describing the constraints. That, okay, where the bottleneck is, that is your primary focus. You're not going on describing the constraints, where the constraints lie. That is too deep. You only introduce the constraints, you're only starting to explain the constraints. So sentence 2 will be the odd one out. Let's check. Yeah, correct. Let's have a look once more how we arrived at the answer. Of course, you need to talk about the author and what theory he has proposed. Clearly, sentence 1 is going to follow because of this theory. This theory says that, okay, there is a limiting factor. Then you explain the limiting factor in detail. Okay, just see that this sentence is explaining in layman's terms what a bottleneck is, and then only you can go ahead talking about the bottleneck as if you've known about it, because you've already introduced it in very simple terms in sentence number 5, that if you're driving down a freeway and traffic construction in a narrowing all cars into a single lane, this bottleneck or a choke point, so now this is how you've described the bottleneck, becomes the constraint, determines how fast you will get to your destination. So this is the conclusion, that okay, the speed at which you will pass through this bottleneck will largely determine the speed of your entire journey. Clearly sentence 3 logically follows sentence 5, so sentence 2 will be the excluded one. So this is it on odd one out or sentence exclusion. I hope this series was helpful. Please do rate and review the series so that we can take into account the feedback for the upcoming lesson series on para summary. Thank you so much for watching.